Hello there. My name's Barbara Allen, and I'm talking in the second video about highly sensitive adolescents and maybe older highly sensitive children who may come to the attention of helpers, I guess, maybe teachers, maybe therapists, maybe referred to mental health services. So this isn't an all-encompassing video with every aspect of this, but having worked with parents bringing highly sensitive children and adolescents to me, I just wanted to share a little bit about maybe some different perspectives on how they can make the most of the systems that are available to them, and some of the confusion that can arise, I guess, with various professionals and parents and schools, and for the adolescent themselves. So this is just going to be a very short video with just a few thoughts from my experience working with parents and their children. And it may be that, some of this is useful to you and some of it doesn't match your own way of looking at it, but that's okay. Just take what's useful for you and leave the rest. This is just a perspective. So let's make a start. Sometimes when I see parents who bring sensitive children to me, one of the main things that they're dealing with is high anxiety, and sometimes they've been referred here in the UK to places like CAMS and maybe to school counsellors and so on. And even so, parents are still seeking some support for their highly sensitive teenager. So you might ask, well, why is this? Because all the services are out there. Why have they turned up wanting to see me? And one of the main reasons, I think, is because either the parents or the teen, even though they have support offered, they really still feel they're being misunderstood. And one of the main areas in which they're being misunderstood, I think, is in terms of how we view their natural trait, their genetic trait of high sensitivity. Now, one of the difficulties, I think, for a lot of professionals who work in the field of mental health, emotional health, is that they don't always receive specific training about the research of Dr. Elaine Aron, about high sensitivity, vantage sensitivity, sensory processing sensitivity. There are different names for it. And there's also quite a lot of confusion, I think, between what is a normal and natural trait based on response to the environment and what are sometimes described as problematic traits, maybe traits of disorganization rather than something that's highly organized, which the highly sensitive brain is. So what kinds of things can people get confused about? Well, I guess, being anxious and being sensitive to sensory stimuli like lights and sounds, chaos, and that kind of thing can often remind people of other traits like you find in people who are on the autistic spectrum. There are certain overlaps with their responses and some of the difficulties they have, but actually the trait of high sensitivity isn't actually related to that. And one of the things that also is overlooked is just how much the normal everyday life and school system for a highly sensitive child is totally overwhelming and overstimulating. So they're often presented as children with, I'm going to put problems. And the way that I see it is that they're actually children for whom there has been no break since they first went to school. They've often attended schools where it's a long 7-hour day, it's noisy, even in the break times. They can't spend time alone because that's interpreted as being antisocial. They get very little downtime. And one of the common things that happens with highly sensitive children as well, and the same with adolescents, is that their sugar levels can drop quite quickly. So having to eat at specific times that fit with the school system can sometimes mean that they find life quite difficult and have different reactions. It can make them more highly emotional if their sugar levels drop, and it can change their behaviour. So it's worth taking that into account. But other things, when you have a child who's completely overwhelmed by their environment, by the noise, the chaos, by picking up on the feelings of other children, by being very upset when they perhaps see children being bullied or not cared for very well, they sometimes develop different types of behaviour, like they might become more withdrawn, they may respond less, they may be able to focus less, and when they focus less, they seem like daydreamers, or they can be told that they're not really concentrating at school, and a problem is found with the child. Sometimes it's even identified as there must be something awful going on at home, whereas actually that could be the only place the child ever gets a break. So I think it's worth, if you're dealing with professionals, asking them to get some training, or at least to read Dr. Elaine Aron's book that's been specifically written for professionals so that they can understand the highly sensitive trait and learn to work with it better. I think most of the highly sensitive people who end up in mental health services are probably simply completely overwhelmed highly sensitive children. And because it's gone on for so long, and their cortisol levels have been high for so long, their adrenaline levels have been going on for so long, they are so wiped out, and they've also developed anxiety, often maybe to the point of a disorder. And what they really need is not a whole plan so they can get back to school. What they need is a whole plan so they can get back to being who they are, who they really are. Someone who can get the peace and quiet that they need, someone whose feelings that are influenced very easily, someone who can be appreciated for their emotional depth. So if you're a parent of a highly sensitive adolescent who's going through some difficulties, maybe finding it hard to attend school, do remind teachers, counsellors and so on that sometimes there are good reasons why highly sensitive children who have no other developmental issues or emotional issues can actually become completely burnt out just by being in an environment that never lets up. So just be aware of not putting too much pressure on them, making sure they have enough time out, not too many activities going on after school unless they desperately want to do them. They're not failing if they don't do as many things as everyone else. Highly sensitive children and adolescents, they're more quality people than quantity, so it's okay to give them time to do apparently nothing. They really need that time to calm down. Their nervous system can get quite overwrought after a day in school or college. I just wanted also to say that most highly sensitive adolescents are mature beyond their age. And when they're overwhelmed, they can sometimes flip over to seeming quite immature for their age. Often it looks a bit like a horseshoe. So generally speaking, in terms of managing emotions, managing life, if you were to look at life as a continuum, they're quite capable in normal circumstances of sliding up and down that scale. So they can slide up the scale of responsibility and mature behaviour for their age. And depending on what's needed, if they're not very well, they might be less mature. We all are. When we need to be cared for, we're more childlike. But they'll slide around the middle like that. But when they're under a lot of stress and they're overstimulated or burning out, what happens is that turns into a horseshoe shape. that line. And instead of sliding around the middle, all that happens is that they ping from one side to the other. So there'll be 1 minute very, very mature, and the next minute crying like a baby. And that's just a sign of the amount of stress that they're under. And because highly sensitive adolescents, they make up 20% of the adolescent population, because they're a minority. I mean, they're a huge minority really, but because they make up a minority in the population, often their behaviour and their needs is interpreted according to the 80% majority. And it's really important, I think, as parents, that you recognise that that's not the way to proceed. It's not okay to answer every need of your child with, yes, but in this world we just have to get on with it. Well, no, we don't. And sometimes there's a reason to make adjustments, to allow a child extra time just to be more attuned to their emotional needs. A lot of highly sensitive children are, about 70% are introverts, and they don't have huge friendship groups, and yet such a lot of even report writing considers, how many friends a child has. And again, it's quality versus quantity for a lot of highly sensitive children. They might only ever have 1 or 2 good friends, but they're the ones that they know at depth. So let them nurture those relationships, and don't worry too much if they don't have a hugely wide friendship group. They're not like the others, so the opportunity to meet someone like themselves is reduced, and it's important to let them choose their own friends. One of the other things also is that the highly sensitive nervous system responds differently to all sorts of medications and drugs. And if you think that your child is getting a little anxious and needs a bit of support, sometimes the first port of call is not necessarily your GP, but maybe some very gentle natural remedies that help to calm the nervous system can work quite well with highly sensitive children. And it's worth trying those. Ask around. You'll probably find that you've got a friend who's got a highly sensitive child who maybe could recommend somewhere that they get something that's natural and safe to take. Your GP might even be able to make some suggestions rather than resorting. I mean, if a child gets too overwhelmed, then as they get older and they become older adolescents, they're going to end up needing some medication to help the nervous system calm down. But if we can handle it correctly, maybe there's a gentler way of just making space and providing some natural remedies. Another behaviour that you sometimes find with adolescents is what's sometimes misinterpreted as avoidance. So they may avoid situations which you think they need to become involved in. And there's also a sense that, if they withdraw a little from the world, they won't know enough about the world. But I can assure you, more than most people, highly sensitive children and adolescents are only too aware of what's going on in the world. They process everything at depth, so it's important that they need to be able to withdraw from it, to have quiet time, be away from people, and maybe pursue things that are not necessarily what most people would call productive, but which actually give them joy. So like spending time with animals, listening to music, going for walks by themselves, and things like that. When a child who's highly sensitive looks like they're avoiding, sometimes it can be that they're trying to protect their nervous system from overstimulation. So always just check with yourself what you think they're trying to achieve. If a child feels that they can never get away from overstimulating situations, they're going to burn out and they're going to change the way they make decisions. So learn to know the difference between protection and avoidance. Obviously, most adolescents and highly sensitive children will avoid things when they really don't want to do them, and you as a parent do have to work out whether you need to chivvy them along and help them to accept responsibility for something, or whether actually this child has had enough for the day and just needs time out. Accepting difference in your children. If you have other children who are not highly sensitive, just be aware that you need to know about the difference and adapt your expectation of your highly sensitive child to match who they are. Most highly sensitive children at some point can do with a day off school. Every now and again, when they're overwhelmed, it does them a lot of good just to stay at home on their own, away from their siblings, quietly doing something, having a really good rest. Well, if your attitude is, well, all your brothers and sisters have to go, so you have too, then that child for whom attending school or college is 10 times as hard is never really getting a let up, and they are a little bit different. So help them protect their nervous system sometimes. If they're really overwhelmed, give them a day off. I know it might sound like it's a very irresponsible thing to do, but I can assure you sometimes it's the best thing for your child's health, and it can actually help to avoid burnout and school refusal. So consider it. I don't mean let them not go to school every day, but every now and again you should be able to tell if your child is really struggling that they need a day off. And needing a day off because of overstimulation is just the same as needing a day off because your cold is particularly bad. So weigh it up and decide what you think your highly sensitive child needs. There's an aspect of high sensitivity, I think particularly with male children, that can be confusing to parents, where often we think, certainly with girls as well as boys, but often with boys, that they need to toughen up a little more, and sometimes we think that they need to be able to be strong and grow a thicker skin. And sad to say, highly sensitive children don't grow a thicker skin. It's not what they're for. They're actually almost designed in a way by nature to be more available to what's going on around them. What they do need to learn is to be able to manage their feelings and acknowledge and respect them. And by doing that for them, by acknowledging and respecting their feelings and finding strategies to be able to cope, you are helping them. But they are never going to stop being affected when something in the world is sad, when something's not right, when something's not just. They are the people, when they're grown-ups, who will stick up for others, who will find ways around complex problems. So don't worry too much if they seem, some parents call it, if they seem a little too soft. That's how they're supposed to be. We need a few gentle people in the world. And if they get upset easily because something's not right, remember that their sense of justice is probably going to serve somebody very well later in life, and that's okay. Somebody has to notice when something's not okay, and often it's highly sensitive children and adolescents who feel it the most. What they need help with is to cope with those feelings, not to ignore them or stop having them. Adjusting your expectations to match your child's real, natural way of being can be quite hard as a parent, especially if you've been brought up by parents who told you how to be, and especially if it suited you very well to be just that. So having to adjust to a child who wants to do everything differently, who does want to join in all the sports and wants to spend time on their own reading a book when everyone else is outside playing, it can sort of seem a bit counterintuitive, can't it? Because you feel like as a parent you should encourage them to go out and learn to socialise. The thing is, a calm and relaxed, highly sensitive person knows how to socialise. They're friendly. They like people. They just don't want to be overwhelmed. And that's the main reason that a child or adolescent might start to avoid So if you're a parent, don't worry too much if you're struggling to adjust. That's what your highly sensitive child has to do every day. They have to adjust and bend slightly out of shape to fit into a system that's really designed for 80% and not the 20% to which they belong. So it's just an opportunity to sort of look at things from a different perspective and try out different ways of looking after your child and helping them meet their needs. Giving the book from Elaine Aron to therapists and mental health services and teachers can be quite useful. There are places where you can get talks for teachers so that they can better understand, a fifth of the pupils at school. So it's not all a bad thing if you're addressing all these new bits of information. Well, this second video just wanted to cover really those of you who are having to deal with other professions and to deal with children who are maybe suffering from anxiety or depression. And if you have any questions or comments, maybe some examples of situations that you've been in, or if maybe your experience has been completely different and this isn't the kind of child that you recognise as the one in your home, that's okay. There are all sorts of children in the world, and even highly sensitive children can vary enormously. Some are introverts, some are extroverts, and some with the right support will be finding everything fine. But that minority of highly sensitive children and adolescents who are really so exhausted from trying to fit into a world into which they feel they don't belong. Actually, they do belong there, but in their own way. It's a hard slog for them. And it's a hard slog for the parents who are really worried about them when they're suffering. So give yourself and your child credit for managing in a world that's not designed entirely with their needs in mind. And remember that it's okay to adjust for a child who is a little bit different. It's part of acceptance of difference. It's how we grow and change. And your child accepting themselves as they really are is part of their personal development. You can encourage that by accepting them just as they are and encouraging them to be highly sensitive and strong at the same time. Okay, well that's all from me. I hope this second video has been of some help, and I hope that you have a good day with your adolescent. Try not to worry too much. Highly sensitive children do generally find their way in the end. All they need is the love and support that you can give them along the way. Bye for now.